from that vehicle right now.
Excuse me? This is my car.
Yeah, right. I know what you're doing.
Hands on the hood.
You are making a mistake. I am a magistrate.
Shut up! I said hands on the hood. Now!
You can't do this. I know my rights. This audio, captured on a civilian cell phone at 11:36 a.m. on a clear Tuesday, marks the emotional apex of Incident 774B. But the man shouting was not the victim. He was the perpetrator, a city police officer whose world was collapsing in real time. The case file, now a public record, documents a textbook example of karmic justice, swift and devastatingly complete. What began as a racially motivated, illegal stop of a black man in a luxury vehicle would unravel into a career-ending, life-altering catastrophe for Officer Frank Miller. The incident, recorded from 4 different angles by high-definition security cameras and the officer's own body cam, provided irrefutable evidence of gross misconduct, assault, and a federal crime for the deprivation of rights under color of law. The consequences were not abstract. They were quantified down to the last dollar: a summary dismissal from the force, the forfeiture of a 20-year pension, a federal prison sentence of 6 years and 8 months, and a civil judgment that would cost him and his employing municipality a staggering $8 million. The target of this aggression was not just any citizen. He was United States Federal Judge Marcus Thorne, a man who had spent his life interpreting and upholding the very laws Officer Miller was shattering. This is the documented account of that confrontation, a precise anatomy of how a single prejudiced assumption acted upon with unwarranted aggression led to the total and quantifiable ruin of the man who made it. The story begins not with the shouting, but in the quiet, deliberate world Judge Thorne inhabited just hours before the encounter. The air in his federal chambers was still and smelled of aged paper, lemon polish, and the faint metallic scent of the Scales of Justice statue that stood in the corner. Judge Thorne was a man defined by precision. At 52, his movements were economical, his gaze analytical. He reviewed briefs with a methodical rhythm, his pen making small, sharp notations in the margins. He was known in the legal community for his intellectual rigor and his unyielding intolerance for shortcuts, both from the prosecutors and the defense attorneys who appeared before him. His courtroom was a theater of consequence, a place where facts were sacred and the law was absolute. He had presided over cases involving vast criminal enterprises and complex corporate fraud, and his rulings were rarely overturned on appeal. He understood power, not as a tool for domination, but as a responsibility to be wielded with surgical care. On this particular morning, he had finalized a lengthy opinion on a public corruption case, one that would send a powerful city official to prison for accepting bribes. His work was a constant navigation of human fallibility, a daily confrontation with greed, desperation, and malice. Yet he never became cynical. He held a deep, almost reverential belief in the system he served, seeing it as the last and best defense against chaos. When he left the courthouse for a brief lunch, he was not a judge, but simply Marcus, a man seeking a small pocket of normalcy in a life of immense weight. He drove his black Audi A8, a car he had purchased after a decade of diligent saving, not as a symbol of status, but as an appreciation for fine engineering and quiet comfort. It was his private space, a capsule of order in a disordered world. He decided on the Northgate Shopping Center, an upscale complex of clean lines and muted colors, to pick up a first-edition book he had ordered for his daughter's birthday. The act was mundane, a simple errand that thousands of other people were performing at that very moment. He was anonymous here, another face in the crowd, and he cherished the feeling. He purchased the book, spoke briefly and politely with the young woman at the counter, and walked back out into the bright afternoon sun, feeling the warmth on his face. It was in the parking lot as he approached his car that he realized his briefcase, containing his personal notes and a copy of the next day's docket, was still on the passenger seat. He unlocked the car, opened the door, and leaned in to retrieve it. It was a simple, fluid motion, an action of no significance whatsoever. He did not notice Patrol Car 308 as it turned into his aisle. He did not see the eyes of Officer Frank Miller, a man with 14 prior citizen complaints for excessive force, all dismissed for lack of evidence, fixate on him. The officer's body cam, its audio already active, would later reveal his muttered words to an empty patrol car. "Look at that. Black guy in a fancy car in the rich part of town. Gotta be dirty." Judge Thorne closed his car door, briefcase in hand, and turned, his mind already shifting back to the legal complexities of his afternoon. He saw the patrol car blocking his path and the officer stepping out, his posture immediately confrontational. The judge's lifetime of experience, of reading intent and anticipating conflict, told him this was not a routine interaction. Officer Miller began walking towards him, his expression a mask of unearned authority, his hand resting casually, menacingly, on the grip of his service weapon. He was not approaching a citizen to offer assistance or to lawfully investigate a crime. He was closing in on a target,
a preconceived notion made flesh.
It was a critical error in judgment, a single step fueled by a deep-seated prejudice, and it was a mistake that would be documented, scrutinized, and ultimately cost him absolutely everything he had. Officer Miller closed the distance with a predatory economy of motion, his footsteps heavy on the asphalt. The sun glinted off the polished badge on his chest, a symbol of a trust he was about to betray. He stopped a few feet from Judge Thorne, planting his feet in a wide, confrontational stance. His eyes, small and hard, did a theatrical sweep, taking in the judge's tailored suit, the fine leather of his briefcase, and the gleaming black finish of the Audi A8. It was a performance of suspicion, a pantomime of police work built on a foundation of pure prejudice. He didn't ask a question, he issued a verdict. "You, what are you doing with this car?" The words were clipped, accusatory, each one a small projectile. Judge Thorne, who had faced down hardened criminals and manipulative corporate attorneys, remained perfectly still. He met the officer's gaze without challenge, but without submission, his expression one of neutral inquiry. "I was retrieving my briefcase, officer. I own this vehicle. Is there a problem?" His voice was a calm baritone, the voice of a man accustomed to being in control of a room, yet he offered no hint of superiority. He was simply stating facts, offering a simple, logical explanation. This rationality, however, was like fuel on the fire of Miller's preconceived narrative. The officer's lip curled into a sneer. "Own it. Right. Let's see some proof. License and registration. Now." He gestured impatiently with his chin toward the car. Judge Thorne made a slow, deliberate move to reach for his wallet, telegraphing his every intention. Before his hand could enter his jacket pocket, Miller lunged forward, slamming a heavy hand on the judge's chest and shoving him backward. The force was unexpected, and Judge Thorne stumbled, his back hitting the car's hood with a dull thud. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Miller barked, his voice rising in volume and pitch. He was manufacturing a threat, creating a justification for an escalation that existed only in his mind. The CCTV camera on pole P04, its lens a cold, impartial eye, zoomed in slightly, capturing the assault in crystal-clear detail. From its vantage point, it could see the shock register on the faces of a couple walking nearby, who quickly altered their path to avoid the confrontation. "Officer, you have no legal basis to initiate this stop, let alone to use physical force," Judge Thorne stated, his voice still steady despite the physical jolt. He was not pleading, he was informing. He was creating a verbal record, articulating the violations as they happened. This clinical recitation of the law only enraged Miller further. To him, it was not the statement of a citizen aware of his rights, but the insolence of a criminal caught in the act. He saw the judge's composure not as a sign of innocence, but a calculated act of defiance. "Oh, I have a basis," he growled, moving closer until he was invading the judge's personal space, his breath hot and smelling of stale coffee. "A guy like you, in a car like this, in this neighborhood, that's my basis. Now put your hands on the hood of the car before I put you there myself." He had made his prejudice explicit, logging it as evidence against himself on his own body cam. What would you do if you were in the judge's shoes? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to see the moment this officer's world comes crashing down. Judge Thorne placed his hands flat on the warm hood of his car, a gesture of compliance intended to de-escalate a situation that was spiraling into illegality. His mind, trained to dissect complex legal arguments under pressure, was now methodically cataloging every procedural violation Miller committed. The lack of articulated reasonable suspicion, the unprovoked physical contact constituting battery, the unlawful detention. It was a textbook case of civil rights deprivation, and it was unfolding in real time. He tried logic one last time. "Officer, my name is Marcus Thorne. My identification is in my jacket pocket. If you allow me to retrieve it, we can clear this up very quickly. I was at the bookstore across the street, and I can provide you with the receipt for my purchase." He offered a clear, verifiable sequence of events, a pathway back to reason and protocol. But Officer Miller was no longer operating on a plane where reason could reach him. He was on a power trip, fueled by a toxic mix of ego and bigotry. He interpreted the offer of identification not as a step toward resolution, but as a trick. He saw the mention of a bookstore as a flimsy alibi. He laughed, a short, ugly bark of a sound. "You think I'm stupid? You think I'm going to let you reach for something?" His hand went to the judge's shoulder, gripping the expensive fabric of his suit jacket and twisting it. He began a rough, unprofessional pat-down, his hands slapping against the judge's sides and back. The search was a further violation,
conducted without consent and without probable cause that the judge was armed and dangerous. The act was purely for humiliation, a physical assertion of dominance over a man whose calm intelligence Miller found infuriating. "I am unarmed, officer," Judge Thorne said, his voice a low, controlled monotone. "You are conducting an illegal search."
The statement was devoid of emotion, yet it carried the weight of an indictment. For Miller, this was the final straw. The suspect he had created in his own mind was not only defiant, but was now lecturing him on the law. His face, already flushed, turned a deep shade of crimson. The official police report would later quote a witness who described the officer as looking unhinged. "That's it, you're resisting," Miller shouted, the accusation absurd given the judge's complete physical passivity. "You're under arrest for resisting and obstruction." He pulled his handcuffs from their pouch on his duty belt, the metal clicking ominously in the quiet parking lot. He was about to compound his series of costly mistakes with a final, catastrophic error. He grabbed Judge Thorne's left wrist, intending to wrench it behind his back. It was a point of no return, a physical act of false arrest that would trigger a chain of events so severe, so financially and personally devastating that it would erase his entire professional and private life. The handcuffs never fully closed. As the cold, serrated edge of the handcuff began to encircle his wrist, Judge Thorne executed a maneuver that was neither defensive nor aggressive, but purely strategic. It was a move born from a lifetime of intellectual combat, a final verbal gambit that would reconfigure the entire power dynamic of the encounter. He did not pull away or struggle. Instead, with his free hand, he calmly retrieved his phone, its screen already active, and placed it on the hood of the car, its microphone aimed at the unfolding scene. He then shifted his gaze, looking past Officer Miller's contorted face to stare directly into the small circular lens of the body cam mounted on the officer's chest. He was no longer speaking to the man, he was speaking to the official record. "For the record, my name is Marcus Thorne, United States Courts, identification number 20-114. I am a federal judge. Officer Frank Miller, you are currently in flagrante delicto for violating Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code for the willful deprivation of rights under color of law, in addition to assault and battery." His voice was not loud, but it projected with the clarity of a courtroom pronouncement, each word a carefully placed brick in the wall of Miller's ruin. The CCTV camera on pole P04 captured the moment Miller throws, the metallic click of the handcuffs left unfinished. The officer's body cam documented the shift in his own expression, a rapid-fire sequence of arrogant disbelief dissolving into the pale, sickly sheen of panic. "A judge?" he stammered, the word catching in his throat. "You? Tell me another one." He was trying to bluff, to regain control of a narrative that had been violently wrested from him, but his voice lacked conviction. "Now you're getting arrested for impersonating a federal officer and resisting." It was a desperate, flailing accusation, the last gasp of a man drowning in his own prejudice. But Judge Thorne had one final, devastating fact to deliver. "I would advise you to wait for the state police," he said, his tone unchanged. "They were dispatched by my clerk from the federal courthouse several minutes ago. They are already on their way." The cold, serrated edge of the handcuff bit into the skin of Judge Thorne's wrist. Officer Miller applied pressure, using his body weight to force the judge's arm into a painful angle behind his back. It was a moment of pure physical dominance, the culmination of Miller's escalating aggression. From Miller's perspective, this was the end of the encounter, a successful assertion of his authority over a suspect who had dared to be calm, articulate, and black in an expensive car. The body cam on his chest was recording his victory. But for Judge Thorne, this was not an end. It was a pivot. With his free hand, he made a movement so smooth and economical it barely registered as resistance. He reached into his suit jacket, not for a weapon, but for his wallet. He didn't open it. Instead, he placed it on the hood of the car with a soft, definitive thud. Next to it, he placed his phone, its screen already lit, the red icon of an audio recording app pulsing like a small digital heart. He then did something that completely defied Miller's tactical expectations. He stopped resisting the handcuff, allowing his arm to go slack,
and turned his head slightly, his gaze bypassing Miller entirely. He looked directly into the unblinking lens of the officer's body cam. He was no longer addressing the belligerent man in front of him. He was addressing the court of public record, the future grand jury, and the internal affairs investigators who would dissect this footage frame by frame. His voice, when it came, was not the voice of a man being arrested. It was the voice of a man delivering a verdict. For the record, my name is Marcus Thorne, United States Courts, identification number 20-114. I am a federal judge. Officer Frank Miller, you are currently in flagrante delicto for violating Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code for the willful deprivation of rights under color of law, in addition to assault and battery. The words were not shouted. They were projected with the acoustic precision of a man accustomed to filling a silent courtroom. Each syllable was a legal hammer blow. The CCTV camera on pole P04 captured the exact moment the universe shifted. Miller's forward momentum ceased.
The handcuff, halfway closed, hung uselessly from the judge's wrist. The officer's face, which had been a mask of triumphant rage, cycled through a series of micro-expressions. First, arrogant disbelief, a sneer forming on his lips. Then, confusion, as the specificity of the legal citation pierced his bubble of ignorance. Finally, a wave of cold, nauseating realization washed over him, draining the color from his face and leaving behind a pale, sweaty sheen of pure panic. He was a predator who had just realized he had attacked the alpha of a much larger, more dangerous pack. He tried to bluff, to claw his way back to a position of power, but his voice was thin, reedy, and cracked with desperation. "A judge? You? Tell me another one. Now you're getting arrested for impersonating a federal officer and resisting." It was the pathetic roar of a dying animal. Judge Thorne did not even grant him the dignity of a direct reply. His gaze remained fixed on the body cam. "I would advise you to wait for the state police," he said, his tone flat, devoid of malice or triumph. It was a simple statement of fact. "They were dispatched by my clerk from the federal courthouse several minutes ago. They are already on their way." As he finished speaking, a new sound entered the audio record, faint at first, then growing rapidly in volume and urgency. It was the unmistakable sound of multiple sirens converging on their location. The power of truth is undeniable. Share this video if you agree that a person's identity should never be presumed by the color of their skin. The wail of the sirens was no longer a distant threat, but a physical presence, a sound that vibrated through the asphalt and up into the soles of Frank Miller's boots. The audio recording from Judge Thorne's phone, still active on the hood of the Audi, captured the escalating pitch with perfect fidelity. At precisely 11:38 a.m., the incident log notes the arrival of the first of 3 vehicles. 2 state police cruisers, their blue and red lights painting chaotic strobes across the faces of the gathering onlookers, screeched to a halt, boxing Miller in. They were followed moments later by a black and white City PD supervisor sedan, which parked at an angle, its driver's side door flying open before the vehicle had fully stopped. The footage from Officer Miller's own body cam becomes a critical piece of evidence here, documenting his subjective experience of his world collapsing. The lens captures Sergeant Davis, his direct supervisor, a man he had shared coffee with just that morning, practically vaulting from his car. Davis was a portly man, not prone to running, but now he moved with a desperate urgency. Miller's perspective shows Davis running, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated panic, his eyes wide. But he wasn't running toward Miller to offer backup or to take control of a resistant suspect. He ran straight past him, his gaze fixed on the man Miller still had pinned against the car. "Judge Thorne! My God, sir, are you all right?" The words, breathless and strained, were a cannon shot in the sudden quiet of the parking lot. It was the first devastating crack in the foundation of Miller's reality. Simultaneously, State Police Captain Riley, a tall, imposing figure with a face carved from granite, emerged from his cruiser. His movements were the antithesis of Davis's panic. They were calm, deliberate, and radiated an aura of absolute command. He took in the scene with a single sweeping glance. The half-cuffed federal judge, the stunned city officer, and the growing crowd of civilians with their phones raised like a digital firing squad. His eyes met Judge Thorne's, and he gave a short, crisp nod of recognition and deference. Then that same cold, analytical gaze settled on Officer Miller. The fury in Riley's eyes was not hot and explosive, but a glacial, terrifying cold. He turned to one of his troopers, a young, athletic officer who was already unholstering his sidearm in a low-ready position. Captain Riley did not raise his voice. He didn't need to.
The command was quiet, precise, and carried the weight of an execution order. Disarm and detain the officer. Now. For Frank Miller, the world seemed to slow down, the sounds of the parking lot fading into a dull, distant roar. The man he had profiled, assaulted, and was in the process of falsely arresting was not a criminal. He was a figure of such authority that his own supervisor was stammering apologies and a state police captain was treating him with the reverence reserved for a head of state. The universe had reoriented itself on an axis he never knew existed, and he was on the wrong side of it. The hand holding the handcuff went slack, the metal dangling uselessly from his fingers. The blood drained from his face, leaving a pasty, gray pallor that was captured in vivid detail by no less than 4 separate cameras. The state trooper moved with a chilling, professional efficiency that was in stark contrast to Miller's earlier clumsy aggression. He approached Miller from the side, his expression completely neutral, his movements economical and certain. There was no negotiation, no shouted commands. He simply took Miller's right arm, the one holding the service weapon, and with a practiced twist, forced the gun from its holster. The sound of the weapon being secured by another officer, the click of its magazine being released, was the definitive sound of Miller's career ending.
The trooper then took the very handcuffs Miller had intended for Judge Thorne and, in a single fluid motion, snapped them shut around Miller's own wrists behind his back. The metallic clicks echoed with a profound and devastating irony. The public humiliation was now absolute and visceral. The small crowd of shoppers had swelled, drawn by the spectacle of a police officer being arrested by other police officers. Every phone was recording, ensuring that this moment of total abasement would be preserved and broadcast, a permanent digital scar on what was left of his life. Throughout this entire sequence, Judge Thorne remained perfectly still. He slowly lowered his hands from the hood of the car and, with his free hand, massaged the red, angry mark left on his wrist by the half-applied cuff. He did not speak. He did not have to. His silence was an indictment, his calm composure a verdict more powerful than any words. He simply watched the protocol unfold, his expression unreadable, as the system he served began the slow, methodical process of excising a cancer from its own ranks. Sergeant Davis, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of frantic damage control, his voice a low, pleading murmur directed at the judge. "Sir, on behalf of the department, I am profoundly sorry. There is no excuse for this. We will cooperate fully. This officer's actions do not reflect our values." His words were a desperate attempt to build a firewall between Miller and the entire police department, but it was too late. The damage was done, and it was catastrophic. The body cam of the arresting trooper captured a close-up of Miller's face as he was guided, unresisting, toward the back of a state police cruiser. His eyes were vacant, his mouth hung slightly open. He was a man who had been so certain of his power just minutes before, and now he was a prisoner, stripped of his badge, his weapon, and his dignity in the most public way imaginable. As the heavy car door slammed shut, sealing him inside, the physical confrontation was officially over. But the true reckoning, the one that would be meticulously calculated in federal statutes, civil liability, lost wages, and years of freedom, was only just beginning. The aftermath for Frank Miller was not a slow decline, but a free fall into a chasm of his own creation, a fall documented with the same cold digital precision as his initial crime. The consequences were not merely punitive, they were a complete and systematic dismantling of a life, a process that began the moment the state police cruiser door closed. The official investigation by Internal Affairs was a formality, a procedural ghost dance. The evidence was absolute, a multi-angle narrative of unambiguous malice captured on Miller's own body cam, the Northgate Shopping Center's high-definition CCTV system, Judge Thorne's personal audio recording, and a dozen civilian cell phones. The internal hearing was brief and brutal. It took place not in a courtroom, but in a sterile, windowless administrative office on the 3rd floor of police headquarters. Miller, out on bail and stripped of his uniform, sat in a cheap suit opposite a panel of 3 stone-faced senior officers. The department's lawyer presented the case, playing only 30 seconds of the body cam footage. No one needed to see more. The video was a confession in high definition. The panel's decision was unanimous and immediate. Summary dismissal for cause, effective immediately. The termination letter cited gross misconduct, conduct unbecoming of an officer, and violations of departmental policies on use of force and biased policing. With that single piece of paper, his 20-year career was vaporized. His monthly salary of $6,200 ceased.
More devastatingly, the letter specified the complete forfeiture of his pension benefits, a nest egg worth over $900,000 that he had been banking on for his retirement. That future, built over 2 decades of service, was now a financial black hole. The administrative ruin, however, was merely the prelude. The criminal prosecution was handled by the U.S. Attorney's Office, given the federal nature of the crime. Miller was indicted by a grand jury on one count of violating Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code, the willful deprivation of rights under color of law. At trial, his defense attorney attempted to argue that it was a simple mistake, a misunderstanding under pressure. The prosecutor dismantled this argument by playing the body cam audio of Miller's initial mutterings. "Look at that. Black guy in a fancy car. Gotta be dirty." It was the voice of prejudice, not procedure. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. The guilty verdict was a foregone conclusion. The judge, a colleague of Marcus Thorne who recused himself from the sentencing to avoid any appearance of conflict, handed down a sentence of 6 years and 8 months in a federal penitentiary. The final and perhaps most complete sphere of his destruction was civil. Judge Thorne, through his attorneys, filed a civil rights lawsuit against both Frank Miller and the city that had employed and failed to properly discipline him. The suit alleged assault, battery, false arrest, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Faced with the mountain of irrefutable video evidence, the city's legal department knew a jury trial would be a financial bloodbath. They settled.
The final number was a staggering $8 million. The settlement agreement was a masterpiece of karmic accounting. $3 million was awarded directly to Judge Thorne for damages. In a public statement, the judge announced he would be donating the entire sum to establish a new public library and technology center in the city's most underserved community, turning an act of hateful ignorance into an engine of education and opportunity. The remaining $5 million was paid by the city's insurance carrier, but the city, in a move to protect its taxpayers and make an example of Miller, immediately filed a recovery action against him. This legal maneuver allowed them to pursue Miller for the portion of the damages caused by his reckless and unauthorized actions. The court sided with the city. Frank Miller's assets were liquidated. His house was sold at auction. His truck and any savings he had were seized. A judgment was entered against him that included a 30% garnishment of any future income he might ever earn for the rest of his life until the debt was paid. He was left with nothing but the clothes on his back and a debt he could never repay. In stark contrast, Judge Marcus Thorne's life continued its steady, dignified rhythm. He returned to his chambers and his courtroom, his presence a quiet but powerful testament to the resilience of the law. His ordeal had not made him bitter. It had reaffirmed his belief in the system's capacity, however slow and imperfect, to correct itself. The footage of Frank Miller, a broken man being led away in handcuffs, became a viral symbol of accountability. He lost his job, his pension, his freedom, his home, and his future. He became a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered in police academies. Was the fleeting, ugly thrill of exerting prejudiced power over an innocent man worth the total and quantifiable annihilation of his entire existence? Did he finally learn that in the theater of consequence, the price of the badge is not power, but a duty that, once betrayed, demands a payment in full? Have you ever witnessed an injustice that was perfectly and completely rectified? Share your story in the comments below, and please share this video to spread the message that accountability is not optional.